This is the sermon for March 27th, 2022. Isaiah 55. Hey there, all who are thirsty, come to the water. Are you penniless? Come anyway, buy and eat. Come buy your drinks, buy milk and wine. Buy without money, everything's free. Why do you spend your money on junk food, your hard-earned cash on cotton candy? Listen to me, listen well. Eat only the best, fill yourself with only the finest. Pay attention, come close now, listen carefully to my life-giving, life-nourishing words. God says, I'm making a lasting covenant commitment with you, sure, solid, enduring love. Seek God while the divine is here to be found. Pray while divine love is close at hand, merciful, lavish with forgiveness. And God continues, I don't think the way you think. The way you work isn't the way I work. For as the sky soars high above earth, so the way I work surpasses the way you work. And the way I think is beyond the way you think. Just as rain and snow descend from the skies and don't go back until they've watered the earth, doing their work of making things grow and blossom, producing seed for farmers and food for the hungry, so will my words and intention bring forth fruitfulness. So you'll go out in joy, you'll be led into a whole and complete life. The mountains and hills will lead the parade, bursting with song. All the trees of the forest will join the procession, exuberant with applause. No more thistles, but giant sequoias. No more thorn bushes, but stately pines. Monuments to me, living and lasting evidence of divine love. And then I want to read a short parable of Jesus from Luke 13, 6 and 7. Jesus told them a story. A man had an apple tree planted in his front yard. He came to it expecting to find apples, but there weren't any. He said to his gardener, "What's going on here? For 3 years now I've come to this tree expecting apples, and not one apple have I found. Chop it down. Why waste good ground with it any longer?" The gardener said, "Let's give it another year. I'll dig around it and fertilize, and maybe it will produce next year. If it doesn't, then chop it down." Well, I'm going to focus on the Isaiah 55 passage, but before I do that, I want to talk about this Luke parable of Jesus. It has been misunderstood by a lot of people. A lot of people imagine, and this is from a man that lived in around the year 1000, Saint Anselm. He came up with the an atonement theory that doesn't hold water as far as I'm concerned. But a lot of people think of this passage as God the landowner angry that the tree is not bearing fruit. Jesus is the gardener who says, "Oh, be patient," as if Jesus has to convince the landowner not to chop it down. I can see why that was attractive to angry people or to people who believe in an angry, vindictive God. But I don't think that that's the God that Jesus teaches us about. And so I want you to see it as God as the gardener. And that's a whole different way of looking at it. In fact, that is a sound interpretation given the rest of Luke. So Luke has people upset, frustrated, angry with Caesar, and then with Herod, and then with Pilate. And they were all unjust rulers, and they were all mean to the poor. They were mean to Israel. They had their own reasons, but they were not good to the people who were vulnerable. And so I want you to think about any current angry ruler, like Putin, for instance, as a landowner who is impatiently demanding destruction for some other purpose. Cut that tree down. I'm going to use the land for something else. I demand profits. I demand what I demand. Basically, it's ego run amok. And so we have God as the gardener saying, yeah, you've looked for 2 years, but that's impatient. 2 years is not much in the larger scheme of things, which of course God is always aware of the larger scheme of things. And so we can be nurtured by God, nurtured by manure, by fertilizer, and we will bear fruit. And so Jesus is teaching the people not to return evil for evil. And so it happens, like I said, with Caesar, with Herod, and with Pilate. And if you look at the other passages in Luke 1 through 13, you can see that people are angry with injustice and they want to return evil for evil. And Jesus is teaching, let's be loving and patient. Let's return good rather than evil. And then that leads us into the Isaiah 55. God trusts divine fruitfulness, which will come as surely as rain and snow and sunshine bearing fruit. So Jesus definitely is encouraging people not to resist evil with more evil. This is contrary to everything the world teaches. And so it's important that God the gardener is encouraging us to believe in fruitfulness in the community, in steady growth when we're faithful. Also, it takes manure for a tree to be fruitful. And we've got plenty of that in our lives, don't we? We have to laugh or we'd cry, right? So now on to Isaiah 55, which is gospel if ever I heard gospel. Israel has endured death and destruction that angry, taking, selfish rulers do. So again, you can think about Putin. Isaiah chapters 1 through 39 are the first chapter in Israel's life up to this point. It's empires around them, huge empires, just crushing little Israel. So 1 through 39 is about destruction. Isaiah 40 through 55, the middle section of the book of Isaiah, is about the suffering servant and about how things could turn around, and God will bring things to turn around. And then Isaiah 55 to the end, where we pick it up today, is about the people coming home from the destruction. They were carried off into exile. They spent 40 years as a people in a foreign land, foreign language, foreign culture. They hung on to their own culture just barely. And now they're coming home and they're trying to figure out, who are we? And what are we about? Are we about returning evil for evil? Or are we about trusting community and trusting nurturing, trusting God for rebuilding community? And so these words from Isaiah 55 are so beautiful. The people came home with very little. They struggled to come to their homeland, and then they had to rebuild on top of struggling to get home. And so they're asking, who are we? And Isaiah 55 says, this is who you are. You are the community of a gracious and loving God. Listen to the words again. Hey there, all who are thirsty, come to the water. Are you penniless? Come anyway, buy and eat. Come buy your drinks, buy wine and milk. Buy without money. Everything's free. In God's economy, love is free. It's hard for us to think about. We think everything has to be paid for, right? No, clearly in Isaiah, God is saying, in my economy, God says, everything is free. Why do you spend your money on junk food? God asks. Your hard-earned cash on cotton candy. Isaiah 55 says, listen to me, eat only the best, fill yourself with only the finest. Come close now. Listen carefully to my life-nourishing words. I'm making a lasting covenant commitment with you. The people that came home from exile, they didn't know who God was. They didn't know who they were. They're trying to figure it out all over again. And aren't we? Aren't we in our American culture trying to figure out who we are as God's people? The church is changing. We need to figure out who we are as belonging to God. These words are pure grace in Isaiah 55. God is saying, you don't bring the resources. I bring the resources. The divine brings the resources. And all we do as God's people is respond. God is lavish with generosity and grace. God asks, why do you spend your money on junk food instead of nourishing food? Why do you focus on Herod, that fox? Remember we talked last week about Herod, an evil ruler, being a fox, a predator that takes and takes. And instead, Jesus is the mother hen. Yes, suffers, but stands with the people. And so let's take our focus off the negative, which will never have the solution. Let's put our focus on love. God doesn't want us doing the same angry and selfish destruction as the enemy. Grace and generosity are the path to true peace. Isaiah and Jesus both offer a suffering love, one that experiences pain at times, but there's also joy, contentment, creativity. Isaiah says, eat only the best, fill yourself with only the finest. Deep and abiding spiritual resources. That's what God offers for us. This will allow us to respond to evil in the best possible way, not with more evil, but with love, with understanding, with patience, like God has with us. At least we want the least hurt given out. And so when we develop ourselves spiritually, when we look to love, when we look to Jesus suffering with love, when we hear the words of Isaiah, pay attention, come close now, listen carefully to my life-giving, life-nourishing words. I'm making a lasting covenant, a commitment with you. Sure, solid, enduring love. Seek God while the divine is here to be found. Pray while divine love is close at hand. Merciful, lavish with forgiveness. When we attend to our profound spiritual growth, there will be fruitfulness and flourishing. Our abiding joy and love will make a difference in the world, rippling out like circles in the water when a frog jumps. Creation itself will rejoice with us. So will my words and intention bring forth fruitfulness. You'll go out in joy. You'll be led into a whole and complete life. The mountains and hills will lead the parade, bursting with song. All the trees of the forest will join the procession, exuberant with applause. No more thistles, but giant sequoias. No more thorn bushes, but stately pines. That's the kind of growth that our responding to God's love can bring. Amen.